All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow me on X at bdomenech. Follow the show on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. I hope that you will rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and recommend it to a friend if you find it of interest. Before we get started today, I just want to say a few brief words about this incredible deal that is going on between the nation states in the Middle East and Israel, looking to end the conflict that has been going on there for 2 years plus, after the wake of the October 7th terrible massacre attacks by Hamas on the Israeli people. The Middle East has been remade. This isn't an exaggeration. We've seen since October 7th Israel do and accomplish things that no one ever really believed were possible. And they've done so more and more with the permission of America, the assistance of America, but without Americans getting personally involved and on the ground to the degree that many people suggested would happen. The people who fear-mongered about the possibility of World War III after going after the Iranian nuclear program, the people who said that there was no way that this war could end up in any kind of release of hostages, who saw it as a conclusion that would never be achieved, they've all got egg on their face today, which is why so many of them are not talking about it. They're ignoring it. They're trying to pretend like this is something that would eventually have happened under other presidents other than Donald Trump. And I just think that that's ridiculous. I think the president saw opportunities, repeatedly took them in ways that ultimately led to a much more strong and successful Israel in so many different ways that are going to have benefits, I think, not just for them, but for the United States and the region for many years to come. And then ultimately a deal that was reached that few thought was even possible to achieve. I've seen so many people who ought to be coming forward and eating crow over what's happened here completely avoid it. Maybe that will change in the months and years to come. But for all these critics who were calling for ceasefire now and suggesting that something like that was never going to happen under Donald Trump, they should be coming forward. They should be admitting that they were wrong, and they should have to wrestle with why they were wrong. When even the likes of the John Meachams of the world, the most insidery people who go out there and weigh in on foreign policy and matters historic as it relates to presidents, when they can go on MSNBC and say this is a historic achievement, when people who say that they hate the president deeply have to admit that this is something that is a good thing for the people of Israel and that we can all be grateful for it, that is a sign that they actually have some level that has to reckon with reality. But for those who don't do that, it should be a sign to you as someone who listens to news, listens to podcasts, sees what happens on social media, sees the interviews that have been taking place over the past year plus, and question whether you can really trust them going forward. You should ask the question, are these people actually telling me the truth? Or are they trying to spin me with something that fundamentally is not true? If they can't reckon with the fact that they were wrong and Donald Trump was right, and that the people who are around him actually delivered something that, at least in the early going, seems to be of great benefit to the people of the region, to Israel's interests, and to America's interests, then I think that you have to say they're just hacks who have to be judged as such, and that everything they say has to come with the caveat that there's some other reason behind what they're saying as opposed to what they're telling you on its face. We have interviews today on The Big Ben Show with Amber Duke and with Peter Navarro on questions as far apart as Virginia and China. I hope that you will follow at Big Ben Show Fox on X and on Instagram. Leave a comment, leave a review. Let your friends know about the show. We really appreciate all the great feedback we've been getting. We'll be back with more right after this. And we're back on The Big Ben Show. Happy to be joined today by senior editor for the Daily Caller Amber Duke. You can follow her on X at Amber Marie Duke. She's also the co-host of Rising at the Hill, and you can subscribe to her newsletter, Unfit to Print, at The Daily Caller. Comes out a couple of times a week. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Amber, and I want to talk about a number of different things in American domestic politics. But I think we have to start with the shift that has happened within the conversation around these critical political races in Virginia. Something that has happened very quickly to turn what was viewed by many as a pretty sleepy election into something that has taken over a lot of the conversation online and certainly has become an item of concern for national Democrats to a degree that it wasn't before, where they thought Abigail Spanberger was going to easily walk away with this, and now it looks to be a much closer run. Tell me a little bit about the dynamics. Our listeners have heard by now about the Jay Jones text and everything that came out of that, but I haven't had a chance to talk about the debate or anything that's followed since then. Are you surprised at how flat-footed Spanberger and her campaign has been in responding to this?
No, I'm actually not surprised. And at the Daily Caller, we did a big enterprise piece talking to consultants in Virginia and activists in Virginia about where the race was shifting, because I think people assumed Winsome Sears wasn't as exciting as Glenn Youngkin, maybe not as strong of a candidate. Spanberger had obviously won in Virginia before on her own 2 feet, serving as a member of Congress. But we started to notice these warning signs for the Democrats, and they were actually the exact same warning signs that we saw ahead of Youngkin's upset, which were really high-profile cases of the Northern Virginia transgender policy coming back to bite them. Mm-hmm. You had Richard Cox, who is a convicted sex offender, running around various bathrooms and exposing himself in front of young girls, and actually exposing himself in a sexual way. And he was hit with a bevy of charges in Arlington for behavior at Washington and Liberty High School. We used to know it as Washington and Lee. But also, he had done the same thing in Fairfax County, and Fairfax is not prosecuting him. And both Spanberger and the Fairfax County prosecutors have claimed that he didn't commit a crime, saying that he hasn't actually done anything that would be considered illegal, even though he was, again, engaging in sexual activity in front of young girls. Mm-hmm. Then there was a separate incident in Loudoun County, which was the real fire starter for the 2021 election with Youngkin. In this case, it was actually a group of boys who got in trouble for complaining that there was a girl who believed she was a boy in their locker room at school and was actually taking videos inside the locker room to prove that they were intolerant of trans people. And it's against school policy, of course, to record in the locker room. But the school didn't care. They suspended the boys for not being sufficiently excited enough about a girl being in their private space. So the fact that Spanberger didn't talk about those incidences, she didn't condemn them, to me, that was really red flag number one.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that was a real sign of this was when, and this has shown up in coverage from much more sympathetic national reporters, meaning Democrats, who were covering this race, who started to openly say, Spanberger isn't handling this question very, very well, and it's surprising to people because she had gotten even some early buzz as being like maybe somebody who could be a VP or on the ticket next time around. Obviously, Virginia swing state, and she's got this whole kind of establishment imprimatur as an ex-CIA person and
right.
all the other things.
The Dems are making the deep staters cool again.
Exactly. And then you had Nick Minock, the WJLA reporter, ask her what should have been a pretty straightforward question about this, and one that you could easily anticipate if you paid any attention to the news. And she gave this word salad
yes.
that I think Dylan Byers wrote about it, and Peter Hamby wrote about it. Like a couple of people of other, basically expressing shock that she was surprised by this question, and quoting, unnamed Democrat sources saying, we were suddenly surprised this could be a problem for her. One thing, though, that I think that betrayed was that she just doesn't do well with anything that she doesn't have a set. And this is not an ideological complaint, because there are plenty of Republican politicians who are the same way, if you don't have a set bullet point list of ways to respond to the question, you do poorly. And that's somebody who doesn't have a natural affinity for people and an ability to communicate that comes to them that way. And so they need that kind of set playlist. She didn't seem to have one on this. And so follow-up questions, she didn't make it any better, it seemed like. I don't know if you've seen the one where she talked about, she was asked, this was a girls and men and girls sports question, which is attendant to, but not exactly the same as the bathroom question, which is much more about safety. This, that one's much more about fairness. And again, just the basic question of, would you reverse the Glenn Youngkin executive order on this? She doesn't seem to have an answer that satisfies anybody. And we've seen that repeatedly. What were your thoughts on why she couldn't right the ship on this? Because it honestly seemed to me like, you guys, you can if you can get something flubbed like this, but with a professional campaign, you've got to figure this out.
I think the problem is that she finds herself, and most Democrats find themselves between a rock and a hard place on this issue because they have so many. I mean, let's be honest, like probably 99.99% of transgender activists or even just transgender people are voting for Democrats. That's a significant part of their base and a really active part of their base. So she can't go out there and say, yeah, we're going to keep the Youngkin executive order and we're not going to allow trans people to play in girls' sports and we're not going to let them use girls' locker rooms at public high schools or elementary schools. But she also doesn't want to admit that she wants transgender people to be able to use those spaces because that turns off parents and normal people. Yes. So she has to do this mealy-mouthed response, which is the one that she gave, which is something along the lines of, well, I have 2 daughters, so I understand the issue. And, we have policies in place, and I think those policies they've been debated on the local level, and so that's what it's going to be. And it's like, well, no, you're running to be the governor of the state, right? So you actually do have a say in this. Yes. And trying to pass the buck to local officials when this is such a hot button issue just doesn't satisfy people. And we saw this in the debate too, Ben, which is when people were asked to give reviews of her performance, they described her as robotic, as cold, as not caring about the issues as much as Winsome Sears. And it's because she literally sounds like she is reading off of a script for every single question.
Frankly, I don't know, I'm unfamiliar generally with the moderators of this debate, but I was impressed with the fact that the moderators kept going back to her and saying, well, but the question was
yeah, they did great. I was very impressed.
Which is, frankly, I think the job of the moderators, just to say, okay, so you didn't answer the question. I'm just looking for an answer to this.
It's yes or no.
Yes, no.
Super simple.
Yeah. And the other thing that what surprises me, I guess, and I genuinely about this issue and the way that it has transpired in the time since last November's election is that the immediate reaction to that election from people who I still think get listened to on the left was we got too far on the culture stuff. The culture stuff hurt us. Crime and chaos hurt us. The border hurt us. And we need to back off on all of these different things, or we need to find some middle ground that, can reestablish the Democratic Party as being people who don't want a chaotic border or don't want chaos in major cities, and who also, care about, Title IX and girls' sports and things like. We need to figure out a way about this. This campaign seems to be running as if that didn't happen, as if like none of that happened. When it was, it was openly being discussed. I mean, there were New York Times people who were saying, we got too far on this. We got to like roll it back a little. Let's be more realistic. Maybe we got a little too invested in this arc of history talk around this issue, especially when, and I think that this is kind of the permission structure, especially when Europe and the UK and other places who were kind of ahead of the curve on particularly gender reassignment, surgery, and drugs and things like that, seem to be really pulling back and in a very significant way. Why do you think they're running on basically the same playbook? There's no difference fundamentally between what Spanberger is doing and what they were doing last year.
I think there's 2 major things. One of which is that, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I did see a study a few years back that said that Virginia is actually the state with the most per capita trans people in the entire country.
I would not be surprised.
Right. Like, especially in Northern Virginia where you and I live.
They're certainly quite high, I would just say.
Right. I mean, I think I believe I have a transgender child that lives on my street, and I've never like lived anywhere else where I have actually met one in person, which was kind of surprising to me the first time that I saw this phenomenon in person.
Trust me, once you start going through the process of looking at schools, this will you will be surprised by how much this is a surprisingly a lot issue.
And then I think the second thing is that the Democrats kind of took for granted that they had Virginia. The past 5-10 years have turned Virginia pretty solidly blue, but on the state level and on the local level, it still is very much a swing state. And I think Democrats read the presidential results and thought that that would be extrapolated to the governor election or to the AG race. And one interesting part of this election, too, that is worth mentioning is that the AG race between Jason Miyares and Jay Jones, even before the Jay Jones texting scandal, was much closer than the governor's race. And this is consistent with some polling that I've seen from Republican consulting firms that finds crime is actually now the top issue for most voters, even ahead of the economy. And something like 86% of Americans say that crime is a serious issue and that they're very concerned about it.
Well, and I think that that's also one where you see the effects of some of local Democrat control in some of these areas having contributed to that.
Right. Steve Descano in Fairfax County, and I mean all of the local
unwillingness
prosecutors.
To prosecute, especially when you have these stories come out, it can't be interpreted as anything other than being soft on crime. I mean, it's just not believable when you say this guy, these people who have done repeated, criminal acts or things that seem on the surface to any reasonable person to be something that seems like a criminal act. Oh, well, we can't prosecute them because we're not sure.
Or we let them out on, bond or even no bond, and they go on to kill somebody.
Yeah,
I mean, it happens all the time in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
And I'm saying all the time somewhat facetiously, like that's not a literal statement, but it happens enough where
people take the lesson from it.
Yes.
And look, that was one of the reasons why I felt like Democrats were completely losing the argument on DC crime, because they were basically making arguments, no offense to Paul Ryan, but the Paul Ryan style histogram. See, look at the chart.
Right.
Yeah, but my friend got mugged. And it's like, so anyway.
Look at this pie chart I made at Heritage. Yeah.
But the thing that I think is interesting at this point is, so you have her dealing with those difficulties, and then this Jay Jones thing comes along, and the whole of Spanberger's campaign, and it's for listeners who are not in the Virginia area, God bless you, you don't have to suffer through off-year election campaign ads. The whole of her ads have been attacking Sears as being an unstable person.
Right.
And the way that she actually frames this in her ads is by using a speech that Sears gave where she was, of all things, mocking Kamala Harris over doing this I am speaking line. And they pretend like instead this is, Sears being herself as opposed to joking around with the crowd. And trying to frame her as this extreme, unbalanced individual. And here's this balanced, I have, kids in Virginia schools person over here. She's, this blonde Karen type.
Well,
but
and the phrase was, Winsome Sears is so far right, she's wrong for Virginia.
Yes.
That's the tagline.
Yes. And that runs into a big problem when the guy on your ticket whose name is also right below yours on all these signs is discovered to have been someone who literally fantasized about murdering the then Republican speaker and hoped that his children would die to make a political point. Let me ask you just a basic question. Were you surprised that there was not even a brief period where he tried to pretend those weren't his texts?
Actually, yeah. That's sort of their MO, isn't it?
Right?
I thought he was going to do the Joy Reid I was hacked bit.
Or like there's missing context here,
right.
Or she spliced it or something like
that.
But
no, instead he went straight to this is a Trump-backed smear.
Yes, and the thing that I actually took away from that, and I don't know much about Jay Jones, I do know that he has a bit of a reputation for having a temper and that kind of thing. it didn't seem, I think part of this was if you don't have the ability to deny something like this, then it's partially because you know that this is something like people can.
There's
people
probably
who know
more.
him totally know, oh yeah, no,
they're
that
like,
sounds
of course Jay would say that.
Of course Jay would
right.
say that. And even in the context of the text messages, it sounds like the Republican delegate who's been receiving them is like, I'm gonna misquote it, but it's like, I hate when you get like this.
Yeah.
And it's like
she's like, I've said this to you before, Jay. You should probably stop wishing for the death of your political opponents. He's like, but no, really, let me call you and explain why I feel this way.
I mean,
he doesn't just double down; he triples down.
And then Spanberger obviously has to expect she's going to get asked about this in the debate. Why did she botch this?
Oh, it was so bad. She was staring straight ahead as Winsome Sears is trying to get her to answer the question, like, will you call on him to drop out? Do you still endorse him? Why are you supporting him? And she's just staring ahead completely blankly, and it's disturbing, actually. Like, she looks like a psychopath.
Yes, I will admit that, and this is me just putting on my mercenary consultant hat. I would have told her to go into that debate and immediately turn on him.
Oh yeah,
immediately
throw him under the bus.
Throw him under the bus. He's going to lose anyway. He was already in the closest race.
Exactly.
He's screwing you over. Cut him off. And because it doesn't give you anything, and if you have to work with him in the future, guess what? He can swallow his pride. But like, I think that would have been the takeaway. Spanberger decries violence. There is no place for this in the party. We can't accept this. We had a party that had people who wore blackface and people who had all of these accusations against them in the past, and people who thought publicly in the form of the former Governor Ralph Northam, about babies being left to die after attempted abortions.
Keep the baby comfortable.
Yeah.
My husband and I say that to each other all the time,
my
by the way,
God.
because it's so quotable.
It's
so insane.
It's just villainous and insane. And she just has to be. I think you just have to set it up and say, I'm not going to go down for somebody else being crazy. And why she didn't do that, I mean, maybe there's just some feeling they have to hold the line together. But I mean, when Morning Joe is giving you permission to turn on him, right. Joe Scarborough is going on the air and saying this guy's got to get out of the race. You have permission, like you can do that, and they'll, it surprised me as a political act. Where do we stand today? How do you feel about this race today?
Well, there was a poll that came out at the end of last week that now had the governor's race within 2 points from Trafalgar Group.
Yes.
So maybe it's at 4 points realistically, but that's still pretty close to the margin of error. Republicans are salivating right now at how close this has gotten. I think at one point Sears was down by double digits.
Yes.
Now she's...
As recently as a month and a half ago, she was down by double digits.
3 weeks left until Election Day?
Here's the thing, and for folks again who are not in the Old Dominion, we have a ludicrous 45 days of early voting,
oh my gosh,
which is absurd. And of course, there is early voting that happens before this. What Sears people have to be hoping for, and I assume that this is the way that we would see this play out, is not that there are somehow voters who are crossing over to go to Winsome, because I think that she's pretty set in her lane and she's not going to win a ton of people over, but that this whole situation depresses Virginia voters who otherwise would have just lockstep gone for Spanberger and Jones and voted straight Democrat ticket, to say, do I really want to take the time to go and do this for these people who seem to be, on the one hand, so weird and robotic, and on the other hand, actively violent. And I mean, I've said this before, and I've said it on air at Fox. If you do not call for him to get out of the race, my opinion is, on a certain level, you're saying that what he said was acceptable.
And I think sadly, a lot of people on the left do think what he said was acceptable. There was a pro-family group based in Virginia, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but I have a friend that works there.
Family Foundation, probably?
Yes. They sent out paid text messages about the J. Jones text to a variety of voters, but they included the group soft liberals, which in consultant speak is people who typically vote for Dems but are willing to cross party lines, right? Yeah. And they got dozens of replies from so-called soft liberals, which is a moderate Democrat, saying, yes, actually, more Republicans need to die, or yes, MAGA equals Nazi. Jay Jones was right, and I'm glad that he said it. I mean, that was the reply from people who are just like supposed to be marginally on the left.
Have you seen the meme yet of Jay Jones and Spanberger? It's not really a meme. It's just their faces, but it says radical Democrats want to kill Republicans. And then it says moderate Democrats want radical Democrats to kill Republicans.
That's how it feels.
And this is the thing. I said, after Charlie Kirk was shot, I said, I think that this is a fundamental change moment for the way that normie Republicans think about Democrats.
Yes.
In a way that conservatives might have thought in the past, about being targeted, about the IRS, or about, that, my ideological views are going to have consequences. If you're a normie Republican who never ran into any of this stuff and just had, normal Republican kind of vibes about you, I think that this was a kind of rip the Band-Aid off moment.
Think about it. If you live in Virginia and you're a Republican and you see that your neighbors are sending these text messages to a group that is almost certainly going to make them public.
Yeah.
If you have a neighbor with a Spanberger sign in their front yard, you might have the inkling that they think that having someone's children die in their arms to change their political views is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier the early voting problem, and I think that's we should hit on that a little bit more, because there were more than 350,000 people who voted in Virginia prior to the J. Jones text scandal.
That's insane.
It is wild. And so I think you're right that given that and these text messages this family group got, the Republicans running Sears' campaign are not thinking, all right, we got to get these disaffected liberals over to vote for Sears. No, it's about depressing turnout and trying to get Republicans to vote on Election Day. Although I did see some reporting that Republicans in Virginia were actually fairly happy with the number of Republicans who had requested early voting ballots. So I think that they feel pretty good.
We see, the context of government shutdowns plays an outsized role in Maryland and Virginia politics, just because of the horde of bureaucrats who run your lives and happen to run our neighborhoods as well. They obviously have played a role in the past in either depressing Republican turnout or helping activate Democrats. I don't really get the feeling that this one is doing that this time. Feel free to disagree with me on this. They have this No Kings thing coming up, which I've heard barely anything about and don't really see as mattering, though Bill Kristol keeps tweeting about it.
That's how you know it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But the thing that I am curious about is if this does play out in a way where Spanberger and Jones ultimately end up losing, is it another indictment of a party using shutdown politics basically on the eve of a Virginia election?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because conventional wisdom would say not just that you're in a shutdown, but you're doing reductions in force, and thousands of people who probably live in Northern Virginia are losing their jobs. That would typically be a big warning sign for the Republicans. But these cultural issues have just been so they've been so...
The resonance is overwhelmed.
They've
really
been so resonant
else.
For Republican voters and even, yes, we're talking about soft liberals that also want Republicans dead. But there are still, obviously, normal Democrats who are this is actually crazy. I don't agree with any of this. And so the fact that, for one, that Spanberger is not running ad after ad about federal worker layoffs, and instead she's still trying to paint Sears as the angry black woman.
None of their ads have changed. It's amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Yeah, and it was hard for me to watch because, of course, internally, I'm cheering at reductions in force. I mean, you talk to administration officials, and you hear
every
about
day these buildings are closed. The republic grows stronger.
It's oh my gosh! I mean, you hear about people who literally have not shown up to the office in years. I've heard from admin officials about people who just straight up lied on their resume. People who are supposed to be coders don't even know the code language that they were hired to work on. People who are actively trying to subvert the people who are their new bosses. It's genuinely insane how much dead weight there is in the federal bureaucracy. So I'm yes, fire them all. And then living in Virginia, I'm but if we fire them all, do I lose my governorship. But it hasn't seemed to really been making that much of a difference for the Democrats.
It does surprise me a little bit, and I think that you're correct that these cultural issues have been so much more resonant, and the whole conversation has changed. Obviously in the past, when you have these off-year elections, sometimes national parties will take major assumptions out of them. We saw that obviously with the backlash against Barack Obama, and that being a symbol with the election of Bob McDonnell and a slate of Republicans in the state that. This is not going to be the necessary sort of inevitability of neoliberalism that we thought it could be. There's going to be some bumps along the way. Do you think that this is going to be one of those where there is any recognition that they've still got a cultural problem, or do the J. Jones texts? And I do believe, I will say, I'm not typically in the prediction game, but I do not see a path for Jones to win at all at this point. I just do not think it's going to happen. I would be legitimately surprised if he did. But in part because Mayaris, as you said, is more popular and is viewed as tough on crime. But the thing is, if there are lessons taken away from this, even if it's just close, do you think it's going to be we got out over our cultural skis and we haven't changed our rhetoric enough, or is it just going to be this would have been fine if not for those text messages?
I think it's the latter, because they haven't learned the lesson from November. Why would they learn it after Virginia?
Yeah.
I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. I also would caution Republicans from taking too much away from Virginia. It is a very unique state. I mean, yes, Youngkin won in 2021, but then what happened in 2023? He lost all of the state House and Senate. So, and then another state just to throw out there is sort of comparison of states are not always bellwethers for national elections is Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
Like Bashir won re-election.
Yeah.
Cameron was not really performing well, but then Trump won in November, and people tried to make Kentucky out as like, well, this is proof that the Trump voters are dead because Kentucky's a MAGA state, and yet they didn't vote for Daniel Cameron. It's like, okay, tell me you know nothing about Kentucky by, without telling me you know nothing about Kentucky.
So picking up the pieces after November, let's say Spanberger pulls it out. She doesn't go down because it wasn't her text messages, and even is turning out to be as bad of a candidate as she's been. The advantages are built in. And Mamdani cruises to take over New York City. Which do you think represents more closely the future of the Democratic Party?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question.
One of them, completely light on his feet, set for social media, made for the TikTok generation. I don't know if you saw the pivot. I went through and wrote about the pivot that happened with Condé Nast. Have you seen this? Where they went from being skeptical to him to doing these glowing puff-up pieces and putting him on the covers and things like that.
Okay, so here's what I think is going to happen. The young progressive Democratic base obviously loves Mamdani. They want AOC to be the next Bernie Sanders. I don't think the Democrat establishment is going to let that happen. You think
they still have enough power to block it?
They're going to try.
That's the critical thing.
I know. They're going to try, because already you see for 2028, who are we talking about? We're not talking about AOC from the Democrat perspective. We're talking about Gretchen Whitmer, Andy Bashir, Gavin Newsom, like all of these sort of old school
Rahm Emanuel.
Moderate Democrats who aren't really moderate.
She's making quotes for those who are not watching on YouTube.
Quote unquote moderates. I mean, just I'll rip on Kentucky again for a minute, just because my husband's from there. I mean, Andy Bashir
is not a moderate.
Yeah, they say he's like he's the blue jeans dad Democrat guy. I mean, they said that about Tim Walz too. But Andy Bashir vetoed a bill that would have nullified all of these gender issues in schools that are currently costing Democrats Virginia. Yeah. So
it's entirely veneer. It has nothing to do with
it's just a label. It doesn't
policy.
actually mean anything. So maybe the Democrat establishment is able to convince the young progressives that all of these people are actually quite, because I mean, this is what happened with Tim Walz. The idea was that he is palatable enough to independent, moderate voters because he's a coach, again in quotes, and just a normal dad, again in quotes,
and look,
who wears a camo hat.
But
also, guys, he did all of these socialistic policies when he was governor of Minnesota. So like he appeals to you guys too. And the young progressives bought it hook, line, and sinker. Do you know? I mean, every young person at the DNC was wearing that stupid camo hat with the orange letters on it.
We were there.
So I don't know. I think that they might be manipulated by the establishment. It might not be an outright, we're going to do the super delegates to make sure Bernie doesn't get the nomination. I think it's going to be more of a messaging manipulation.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see if it can still work.
I know.
This is this Empire Strikes Back moment where the establishment basically has to destroy its own rebel wing.
Right.
And I'm just not sure they've got the
That's why they can't destroy them. They have to propagandize them, compromise them. Yes.
They have to turn AOC into
we got
Gavin
you guys.
Newsom's
Come
best
on
friend.
in. Yeah, we love you guys. You're so right. We haven't been progressive enough. Look at Gavin Newsom. Look at what he's done for California. And he does the podcast, guys. He's on all the podcasts.
And pay no attention to John Fetterman's personal polling rating, which is above all of them. Amber, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. You can follow her on X at Amber Marie Duke. She's the senior editor at the Daily Caller. Subscribe to her newsletter, Unfit to Print. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Big Ben Show, where I'm happy to be joined today by Peter Navarro, Senior Counselor to the President. You can check out all of his work at peternavarro.com, including his latest book, I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to. Thanks so much, Peter, for taking the time to join me today. I found it amusing right off the bat when I was looking at your state of play there in the lead up to your targeted arrest in a very public way. That you actually reside a literal stone's throw from, it seems like, all the different folks in D.C. who spent time in buildings bent on putting you behind bars and going after you in every way possible. Did you just happen to run into them on the street when they were going to lunch, ask them how things were going?
That's a funny story, too, because Merrick Garland actually lived in the same building as I did. There's twin buildings, and he lived in the other twin. I'd look at him get in his little Secret Service car and stuff like that, and I was tempted to kind of give him a piece of my mind. But I mean, if I'd been able to go to Vegas and put a bet down at the beginning of the first term of the Trump administration and say, what are the odds that I'm going to be living in an apartment that I could see 3 government agencies, which would all try to put me in prison, the National Archives, which was like right in front of me, the DOJ, which was on the diagonal, and the FBI, which was on the side, which, by the way, when I was a field goal kicker back in college, I could hit with a field goal from my balcony. I would have been, that would have been bigger than the biggest lotto ticket you could ever imagine. The odds are astronomical. But yeah, I mean, and the problem is my circus arrest, right? Which we're learning a lot about, Ben. I don't know if you've been following it, but Senator Chuck Grassley doing a great job getting whistleblower stuff.
And in fact, it turned out that you had underestimated the degree to which it was a circus.
Yeah. Like the first chapter of I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to is starts with my arrest at Reagan. And I'm doing the TikTok on it. And it's like, I tell about 5 armed FBI agents. Well, we get this whistleblower stuff revealed. And like, this was a big op. They had like a dozen FBI agents out there not looking at trying to get terrorists arrested. They were going after little old me and my fiance, who's like 4'11", for a misdemeanor. And, you read the TikTok on it. It's hilarious. Like, Navarro leaves at 9:02, gets into Uber, and then they pick me up, enters north entrance, goes to gate 2. It's like, and then when I was actually there in the airport 2 days before, I'd ask him, I sent a note to the FBI and called him and said, hey, if you need anything, just, you know where I am. It's just, I'm happy to report or do whatever you want. They totally ignored that. But I was thinking, I was like looking at the guy with the garbage sweeper, and, was he an FBI? How the typical TV show. They grabbed me, leg irons, handcuffs. CNN had the thing like an hour beforehand and things like that so they could report it immediately. But my case, I mean, look, this is a serious thing, Ben, and I think this is probably the best show to talk about the legality of this. I mean, they arrested me for refusing to testify before Congress after I got a subpoena. Now, if you got a subpoena, Ben, you would have to go or risk prison. But the difference is I'm a senior White House advisor, and there's this pesky little thing called executive privilege, which goes back to George Washington. And it's been the policy of the Department of Justice across party lines for more than 50 years. If you get a subpoena, you refuse that because you have what's called absolute testimony immunity. And I was weaned on that, Ben. In the first term, when Pelosi got a hold of the Congress and they started handing out the subpoenas like licorice, it was Don McGahn, the White House legal counsel. It was my good buddy at Ledge Affairs, Rick Dearborn. Kellyanne Conway got one. Rob Porter, the staff secretary. I mean, they just tried to get, and every time one of those guys, my good friends and colleagues, got a subpoena, they said, nah, ain't going. Executive privilege, absolute testimony immunity. So look, I get this subpoena. It was my duty to honor my oath of office. And it's a big issue, Ben. It's like, if you don't have executive privilege and testimony immunity, you can't have what the Supreme Court has called, in defense of executive privilege, candor and confidentiality in presidential decision making. So it's a big deal. It's a violation of the separation of powers for Congress to command a member of the White House to go to the Hill and testify. Just like, as George Washington said about the Jay Treaty when this whole concept was done, I can't order any congressman to come to the White House. Yeah. So I'm fighting it. And I don't know if you've been watching the case, but December, Ben, I'm having oral arguments in my appeal. And what's so interesting about that is that the 3-judge panel contains these 2 judges, Patricia Millett and Cornelia Pillar. They're both Democrat appointees, as is the 3rd judge on the 3-judge panel. Now, go back to the days after I got convicted and sentenced to 4 months in prison. The first thing we did, as my legal team did, was ask for what's called release pending appeal. This is almost like a pro forma kind of thing. No flight risk, major constitutional issues that could be overturned on appeal. Well, guess what? Those 2 judges said I had no appealable issues back then. And now they're going to be the judges.
They're going to be the judges
who are going to judge my appeal. It's like nuts. Our system is broken. That's what the book I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to is about. It's a wake-up call to America that our system of justice is broken, and that if we don't hold the people accountable who broke it, and I name names in I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to, if we don't hold them accountable, they're going to just do it again. And they may start doing it again as early as 2027 January if they get control of the House of Representatives, because those people have no concept of weaponized justice. They just will do it willy-nilly. And I was like, this last week, Ben, I went to the hearing that Chuck Grassley had where Attorney General Pam Bondi testified. And Senator Grassley, as he's done now 3 times in his opening remarks to the hearing, he released another set of whistleblower documents, which was all about my arrest. And it was frightening to me. And I don't get frightened very often, okay? But seeing Durbin and Schiff and all of the Democrat senators start talking about how the Trump administration had weaponized the justice system. Hey, they put me in prison. They put Bannon in prison. They're trying to take the bar cards of John Clark and John Eastman and Jeff Clark. They cost everybody I know, Ben, everybody I know and served with in that first term has paid a very heavy price. If they didn't go to prison, they at least had to pay hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So this is a big issue. I'm glad we're talking today. And yeah, they had no business arresting me when I lived right next door to them.
I want to ask you about the theater briefly before we go on to the legal issues at stake here. I think people have an appreciation now that they may not have had prior to the experience coming out of the first Trump administration of how much the FBI in particular, but the forms of justice that we have here in America are engaged in acts of propaganda when they do some of these things. Particularly, I think people's eyes were opened by the Mar-a-Lago raid and by the idea that this is something. In the same way that you think of the old days of Elliot Ness having the newspaper man there with a photographer, just to see him crack open the barrels. It's one of these things where people, I think, now understand when somebody has this type of experience, the FBI wants you to see them in this context because they want you to predetermine their guilt before anything is actually argued in front of the court of law. To me, I'm not surprised to see, because of that, a number of people online who have complained about some of the cases that have been brought, most recently, of course, against James Comey and Letitia James, that they have not been subject to similar approaches, that they were have been allowed to surrender peacefully and do the normal professional thing. That doesn't surprise me, but I do think that there's clearly a difference there. Do you wish that there was more of that? Just what is Peter Navarro's opinion on that? Do you wish that there was more of the circus attitude, or do you think that that is a degree to which it's actually a sign of seriousness to not go down that road?
I love the question. Look, what I want in terms of accountability is for people who actually broke the law in very serious manner to be investigated. If the investigations confirm what I think we all know, they should be put on trial. They should be given what I wasn't given, Ben, which is to say a fair trial. As I talk about, and I went to prison, so you won't have to. I was stripped of every single defense before I even got to a jury, which is something I never thought could happen in America. I want to see them given a fair trial. And if they're convicted, I want to see these son of a bitches go to prison and not get their wrist slapped, because I was in with 200 felons who were in for crimes that are far less serious than, for example, what I believe Comey, Clapper, Page, Strzok, Brennan, Rosenstein, and Schiff, just to name a few, are guilty of. And look, Ben, the beauty of what we're learning now and what's in my book, I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to, is that my case unlocks the whole conspiracy. Why do I say that? There was the guy who put me in leg irons, following me here, the guy who put me in leg irons, who led the 5-agent team, is an agent named Walter Giordina. What we've learned now from whistleblowers is that Giordina is what I call like the Forrest Gump of the Trump conspiracy. And I don't use that term lightly, okay? But if you look at Giordina, you see the conspiracy. So follow me here. 8 years of a conspiracy either to interfere with the election in 2016, 2020, and 24 to prevent Trump from getting in, or once he was in, to take him out. So it starts with Giordina, the guy who put me in handcuffs and leg irons. Back in 2016, the Steele dossier comes to the FBI. Now, we all know now, this is a fact, even though CNN won't even admit this. Steele dossier was a fabricated document paid for by Hillary Clinton designed to falsely implicate Donald Trump in some kind of Russian entanglement. Full stop. Yeah. Fake as the day is long. Yeah. When the FBI vetted it, one of the agents who allegedly did that, according to whistleblowers, was none other than Walter Giordina, the guy who put me in handcuffs. This was back in 2016. Now, that gave the green light to what? Crossfire Hurricane, which was the big Russia hoax investigation that Schiff lied to Congress about and released all sorts of sensitive documents, which he should go to jail for. Okay. Then Giordina goes to the Mueller investigation for a couple of years. Mysteriously, his laptop gets wiped of all kinds of data. Okay. Ooh, big mystery there. It was a pattern among the FBI agents who worked on the Mueller report to lose data on both their phones and their laptops. At the same time, Ben, I don't know if you remember this operation. It was called Crimson River, and then they renamed it the Red Masari. That was an Egyptian claim that somehow Trump had gotten $10 million from Egypt for a campaign. It's like it was total BS, no facts whatsoever. But Giordina and the FBI used that as a license to hunt, essentially subpoenas, phone records, emails, and all of that. It doesn't stop there, Ben. The biggest one was Arctic Frost, which was the whole J6 thing, which involved, now we know, the surveillance of Republican senators. Okay. And Pence, Trump, all his lieutenants, I bet you a lot of money that I'm going to pop up in one of the next tranches of that. And there was nothing there. But look, how do you do that? Now, I'll tell you one other thing, which I hope makes you laugh. Okay. Because you can't make this up. You know who Walter Giordina's father-in-law is? No. It's a guy named Larry Potts. You know who Larry Potts is? He was the number 2 at the FBI, and he was in charge of the 2 worst scandals in FBI history, Waco and Ruby Ridge. Now, how's that for a family? Okay. So when you go back, the Sean Connery, like with the things in The Wire, it was dope on the table. Yeah, it's like, this is just wrong. This is just wrong. And Kash Patel is changing the culture there, but it's going to be very difficult because it's so entrenched. The DOJ, I mean, it's like we had a breakthrough last week where we finally got 100 people confirmed by the Senate in one piece, and a lot of those are going to DOJ. But Ben, we're fighting the deep state and a mindset that the ends justify the means, and they can put people like me in prison.
So I want to ask you one more question about this, and then I do want to save a little bit of time to talk to you about China. The thing that is currently the focus of debate that you are bearing witness to on cable networks and across social media is surrounding mostly the conversation around James Comey, to a degree the conversation around Tish James. And everyone frames these issues, pretty much the same way on the left and in the vaster part of the media marketplace, which is these are politically motivated, acts of lawfare, and this is ridiculous. These cases are ridiculous, et cetera, et cetera. To me, I think that they're kind of the tip of the iceberg, but more fundamentally, I feel like what people don't understand, and that what conservative voters and people who have paid attention to your situation and at the situation of several of the others that you've mentioned understand now, is that if the conversation goes along the lines of, well, this is political targeting, this, isn't the sort of case they would normally bring, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually, usually at the end of the segment, they get around to saying, now, of course, she probably did sign that, mortgage document, or of course, he was being, dishonest to Congress, and there's always this little element there. Yeah. Or at least sometimes it creeps through, not always, where they basically acknowledge, yeah, the person did this thing, we just don't think they should be held accountable for it. When from my perspective, the accountability has to be even higher for them in those clear positions, because otherwise the assumption is that these people are above the law, and we've heard nothing but 4 years of them saying that no one is above the law, and that gave them permission to go after Donald Trump and everyone associated with him and all of his defenders, including you, for anything that they could find, anything anything that they could attach a hook to, and certainly using, as you said, the public reporting or other false claims to justify wiretaps and investigations that were just designed to turn up something that they couldn't have known. What is your attitude toward the coverage that you see happening right now about the cases, the James Comey situation, the Tish James situation, and others like them?
Well, first of all, everybody who's coming to the defense of James Comey on the left, who's talking about how this is just political or weaponized, this was like, their lips were closed in my case. And the difference between James Comey and I, make this very clear, Ben, the difference between James Comey and I didn't break the law. I obeyed Department of Justice policy on executive privilege. It was my duty constitutionally to refuse the subpoena. On the other hand, Comey broke the law multiple times. Now, in the case that he's being charged with, it looks like a prima facie case of lying to Congress, full stop. That's a felony. But more broadly, if you look at the arc of history, he is guilty of two things, at least in a conspiracy, which would be eligible for RICO prosecution, by the way. He's election interference, because clearly all of the things that transpired with the Russia hoax were prior to the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. And then insurrection, because after Trump got elected, it was a clear case of trying to overthrow the Trump government. So that's serious. Here's the thing, what's interesting to me is like the way the left defends people. Let's take Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve chairman.
Yeah.
I'm in prison. I went to prison so you won't have to. It's done in like diary form. So like 120 days, like what happens each day. Mm-hmm. There's a number of posts in there talking about guys I'm in prison with who did exactly what Lisa Cook appears to have done, which is to say, screw around with information in order to get a loan, right? Yeah. In her case, mortgage loans, in their case, business loans, okay? These are just poor schleps who are in prison for years, Ben. This is like a serious friggin' crime. They're not only in prison for years, they had their assets seized, their families kind of on life support, social welfare, food stamps. And even after they get out, they're going to be burdened with hundreds of thousands of dollars of restitution. Okay? They went to jail. Now, if I'm them watching TV, looking at Lisa Cook, and the left's talking about, slap on the wrist, this is nothing, it's politically motivated, I'm thinking, good God, what is wrong with our judicial system?
To me, people who want accountability or say that they claim to want accountability and want trust and faith restoration in the FBI, regardless of ideology, they should be in favor of accountability. They should be the most in favor of accountability, because we're never going to get back to a point where the average American can have faith in the FBI or in the Department of Justice or in any of these institutions unless you go through that process, unless you have that investigation and have the decision at the end about, well, did they do this thing that it looks like in many cases you could say the evidence indicates that they likely did. If you don't have accountability in that vein, it goes completely against the whole argument that you want this faith to be in institutions again.
Well, I think that this whole debate now reveals the hypocrisy of the whole kind of thing. And more broadly, as we're seeing all these liberal judges stop Donald Trump from doing all sorts of things in all sorts of areas, it further undermines things. I mean, look, Donald Trump would have won the election in a landslide, full stop. But I do believe that my case, sending me to prison, sending Steve Bannon to prison, trying to put Donald Trump in prison for 100 years, that transformed the 2024 election fundamentally from an election just about the economy and inflation and the border into one that also included the weaponization of our justice system. So maybe I got the boss like 1 or 2 votes, but it's an issue.
That's a good way to think about it. That's a good way to think about it.
We've got to resolve. And look, I don't know if you saw my speech.
I did, yeah.
At the convention. I mean, I walked on that stage having no idea what would happen. I didn't know if anybody knew I'd been in jail or anything. And when that crowd erupted as it did, it was like, wow, something's going on here. And the something was going on here is that people are pissed off and tired with these liberal judges who are using the court system and these liberal attorney generals and things like that. And by the way, I went to prison so you won't have to. It's not just the usual suspects at the FBI and DOJ. It's also like Alvin Bragg, Letitia James. I call them out by names. These people have names, Ben. They have names, and they need to be held accountable. It's for one simple reason. They'll do it again. I'm an economist, right? So if you just think about incentives, it's like if they can get away with subpoenaing and holding everything up and doing what they do, then they'll just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like it's sending people like me to prison. I mean, it's crazy stuff. I was the third oldest guy in that prison. I'm the only guy, 200 guys there. I'm the only guy who's guilty of a misdemeanor. Everybody else a felon. Half the people are in there for serious drug and often gun-related offenses. And I wind up in prison. It's like, okay, made the best of it. The book, I think, will make you laugh, cry, and get angry, all that. But never should have happened, Ben. Not in this country.
Well, James Comey wrote an entire piece in his memoir about how important it was to prosecute Martha Stewart to send a message. And so I think that there's ways that things come back to haunt you. Peter, just quickly with the time that we have left, I know that you have been somebody who has been paying attention throughout your career to the importance of America's supply chains and to the issues that we have regarding our dependence on China. What is your evaluation of the current state of the tariff fight and everything that has been related to it in the first year of this second Trump administration? How do you think things are going? Where do you think things are headed as it relates to our relationship with China?
Yeah. So just so your viewers understand, it's like I started my China journey back in 2006 with a book called The Coming China Wars.
Yep.
Did a book and a movie, Death by China, in 2011, and then the military version of that, Crouching Tiger, in 2015. So I'm a close observer of that. Ben, if you want to know what the Chinese are thinking right now, and it's a fundamental sea change that all of us need to be aware of, you just have to read the Chinese press, which I follow closely in translation. And what they're saying to us, what they're saying to their people, is that they've made the decision to basically remove themselves from any dependence on the United States for agriculture or for any kind of chips or anything like that. So they're basically announced a decoupling strategy from us. At the same time, they've made no secret, and again, it's all in the public press, that they are going to use their production capacity, all the jobs and factories and parts of our supply chain that they stole from us, as weapons against not just us, but the rest of the world, Europe, India, other places around, to basically go on the next leg of their journey up to what they want world domination to be in 2049, which is the 100th year birthday of the communist Chinese Communist Party. So that's where this ship's heading, and what we have to do as a country is be clear-eyed about that and take appropriate measures, which the Trump administration is doing, which is to say that we have tariffs in place to defend ourselves against unfair trade, against the carnage, otherwise known as fentanyl, that kills hundreds of Americans every day and millions over the last some years. And at the same time, we're bringing home literally trillions of dollars of investment that's going to help us fill in the gaps in our supply chain. And the first term I was in, Ben, for 4 years, I'm only one of three guys, besides my good friends Dan Scavino and Stephen Miller, who were there for the whole time. I spent a lot of my time looking at gaps in our supply chain and figuring out how to bring those jobs back. And we just have to keep doing that. But it's a very serious matter, and there's just so many things going on in the world that are so serious that I'm just so happy to see President Trump, because he gets it. He's able to multitask. One day he's settling world peace in Israel and Gaza, and the next day he's trying to deal with the Russians and Ukraine. And then China hits us last week with an escalation in their supply chain strategy. So I just want to assure people watching this that we're clear-eyed, we're on the case, and that we're going to do what's best for the American workers, taxpayers, farmers, ranchers, and people.
Last question for you, Peter. I know that this is an issue that has been of significant importance to you over your career, and that you have been quite often a lonely voice on it within the Republican coalition, one that didn't necessarily have the ear of a lot of the people who used to be in charge of the GOP's economic policy. One of the questions about the future of the Republican Party after this second administration has run its course is whether a shift in approach to trade policy and to the way that the leaders of the conservative Republican coalition, the coalition of the right, view those issues is going to be something that is permanent beyond the person of Donald Trump. How confident are you that this presidency and that the experience through it in both of its terms has fundamentally changed the argument on this area of economic policy, that it will have that kind of staying power even when there's someone else, presumably, who's sitting in the Oval or who's leading the party going forward?
Yeah, I love that question too, Ben. Let's contrast where we are now with the first term as a way of answering that. So during the first term, I come in as the trade advisor working with Donald John Trump. Early on, I'm sitting in a cabinet meeting. The boss is wondering why we haven't gone faster on tariffs, and he goes around the room asking every cabinet secretary what they think about the tariffs. And then he asks economic advisors like Gary Cohn, who's sitting in the room. And he goes around the whole room, and every one of the people there expressed reservations or outright opposition to the tariffs. And the only person in the room at the time who supported his policy was me, and for obvious reasons. And at that point, he has an epiphany, and we get moving and rolling. We put the China tariffs in, we put the steel and aluminum tariffs in. Things are rolling, but we get a lot of pushback from the media and from the economic think tanks. Oh, this is going to cause inflation. This is going to cause recession. I was like the target of 2 lead editorials in the Wall Street Journal, not the Main Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal, saying it was going to be the Navarro recession. They literally used that term, right? So none of that happened. All we got was prosperity, no inflation, and a bunch of tariff money, okay? Fast forward to now. It's like the left and legacy media is trying to make the same arguments, but they have no credibility, okay? That's the difference here. So one difference is Donald Trump has proved that tariffs and good trade policy work. And as he has brought in line deals with Europe, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, and just pretty much of the rest of the world, there's an acknowledgement that this is important, trade policy and tariffs work, and that they are here to stay. And the reason, and this is the punchline, The reason why they're here to stay ultimately is because they raise a ton of money, and they do it in a way which doesn't cause inflation or recession, and they help us turn what would otherwise be a very dire fiscal situation with a skyrocketing debt, thanks to Joe Biden, into something that's manageable, where we can actually reduce our debt, not continue to see it go up and pay exorbitant interest rates, where those service on the debt crowds out all of our civilian, road building, social security, everything in between, plus defense. Instead of that. So the answer to your question is it's here to stay as long as the Republicans are in charge, because even the rhinos who were against that on the Hill now like the money. They love the money. And since they're not seeing any downside and they're seeing these deals work, it's a good place. Now, having said that, there's a big decision that the Supreme Court's about to make with respect to our IEPA powers. The appeal that went through, Ben, I don't know if you read that, but the beauty of the decision, even though it went against us, there's a very strong dissent, which was unusual, but it's very well reasoned. It's a roadmap for the Supreme Court to support us. If we get past that with a positive thing, this country is going back to the future of Hamilton and Henry Clay and Jefferson and Lincoln, where tariffs were an essential part of our economic and national security.
Mm-hmm. Peter Navarro can be found for all of his different social things and everything related to his latest book, I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to, at peternavarro.com. Peter, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and for joining the Big Ben Show.
It's been a pleasure, Ben. And I'm looking at your thing back there, and it's Big Ben Show. It kind of looks like Big Ben in the back there, but that's what we all used to call the Trump Tower. I could see it from the house. I could see that in the FBI. So you take care of yourself, and I appreciate your time, brother.
Great to have you, sir. And we're back on the Big Ben Show. I wanted to share just a couple of quick thoughts with you about the state of cable TV. I'm sure that at this point in your year, you are probably looking at the different streaming services that you subscribe to, all the different, methods that people get their TV today, and you're asking, why am I paying for all these different services? And the answer, of course, is that you're doing it because there is nothing bigger than King football in America, and that is the driver of attention that is, of course, forcing all these different people, if you want to see all of the major games and contests, to subscribe to services that they would never otherwise go on for. And then, of course, the services are hoping that you will forget to unsubscribe from them after you've seen the game in question. One of the things, though, that gets lost in the conversation about streaming is how much change has shifted when it comes to the cable side of things. I subscribe to the Substack, The Ankler, which has great emails that go over the different industry things related to the data and the kind of feedback that you get on movies, TV, music, and the like. And it went through recently what the cable bundle is actually down to in terms of what it looks like. The following is the Nielsen data from September 22nd through September 28th and focuses on the live same-day viewing. So it's not delayed audiences or streaming or anything like that. Of course, prime time, Fox, top of the list. You've got MSNBC getting 853K. You've got CNN getting 538K. Fox News is at 2.45 million. Then you have ESPN, which is essentially sports. There is no really other comparable level in terms of the attention that those channels are getting. ESPN gets about 2.7 million for that week. Obviously, this is during the NFL season. And then the only other cable network that averages at least 400,000 viewers in prime time, check out that old granddaddy HGTV, because that's the only one that falls into that category. You've got a couple of others that get 350K, Food Network, Hallmark, TLC. That's it. That is it. What that actually tells you is that in a world where there are 60 million people out there who are subscribing to and getting most of the old school, cable bundle channels via cable that they pay for every month. They are not even generating enough viewership to get over 350,000 people during prime time on any of those other channels that exist. Cable is certainly dying in a very big way. What this is going to do in terms of production and in terms of where these shows go and in terms of the power that is flexed by major Silicon Valley and other institutions that own these streaming networks is going to have, I think, significant effects on the way that American pop culture is produced and how people get it. We are at a moment of significant change in terms of the way that people receive their news and information, and how much they watch cable news and cable generally is certainly on the decline outside of, thankfully, Fox. But it's one of these areas that I believe is going to go through a sorting situation eventually. What the new world looks like, I'm not sure, but we can't really have this type of method anymore where you have to have 12 different streaming services in order to see the things that you mostly want to see, which we know these days is almost exclusively sports. That's one of the reasons why I think you're going to continue to see the type of purchases that have been made by David Ellison of the Paramount Group and CBS. He's now obviously putting in deal-making efforts towards Warner Brothers Discovery and others, because you're going to see consolidation. What that ultimately looks like is going to determine a lot about the way that we see the news media work, and also the way that people consume entertainment, culture, and other content in the future world, where your smart TV is going to be something that went from being an oddity as recently as 10 years ago to being ubiquitous in every household across America. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of your own experience with these networks, whether you view certain streamers as being ones that you find easy to get rid of, or ones that you think of as being essential for your lives, or non-essential based on the different moves that you have made in terms of providing entertainment for your kids or for your family. Maybe you can leave a comment for us, and appreciate it if you would do so on our YouTube channel and YouTube page, and let us know what you're seeing in your own life when it comes to the amount of money you're willing to shell out for this type of entertainment and content. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.